Good afternoon, Facebook friends, and happy Tuesday. For those of you who celebrate Valentine's Day, happy Valentine's Day. Now, I know last week's video may have seemed a little bit discombobulated, but the Word of God says, "Be not weary in well-doing, for ye shall reap in due season if you faint not." So I felt led to go ahead and record the video. Now, last week's video was entitled Relationships Part 1. And I had no idea why the Lord said entitle it Part 1 because I didn't know what Part 2 was going to be about. But now I know. So the title of this video is Relationships Part 2. What about the children? Now we came out of Matthew's the 10th chapter, and in Matthew's the 10th chapter, the Lord was commissioning the disciples to go forth and minister the word of God, but he was sending them out into the households. You see, back then, during the development of the first century church, they went inside the households and they ministered the word of God. Now, he told them, he said, now, when you get there, you're going to find fathers delivering up sons, and you're going to find brothers against brothers, and you're going to find mother-in-laws against daughter-in-laws. And what he was talking about there is he was talking about when you have someone in the family who's given their lives to Christ and who has come into the faith, and they start, their light starts shining in essence, then you're going to have a lot of schism in the household because darkness and light, they can't mix. So when he was saying, I'm going to send you out as sheep among wolves, but I want you to be as wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves. And he said, even you are going to be hated for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. So my message today is relationships. What about the children? You see, what happens is that in the society today, even as it was back then, you're going to have situations in households where you're going to have dysfunctionality. Now, this dysfunctionality is a little bit different from when you have a born-again Christian in the household trying to minister the word of God. Because the word of God says the people of your household, your own household, will become your enemies. Now that, keep in mind, that's that saint who's in the midst of the household or down in the household trying to minister the word of God. But what I'm talking about is our responsibility as disciples to intercede on the behalf of the children who are in the midst of these households that are dysfunctional. You see, it's very important that we take on the mind of Christ as disciples and start interceding for the children that are not our own children. I can remember as I was growing up, a situation occurred in my household, and I was only 3 years old. And as a 53-year-old, I remember that incident today. I remember once I went to my mom and I said, "Mom, XYZ, did that really happen?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, that happened." And then that prompted me to have a very serious conversation with my father. So I went to my father and I said, "Pops, XYZ, did that really happen?" And he said, "Yes, baby, that happened. But you have to realize I did the best I could with what I had." You see, he said, my father was an alcoholic and he physically abused my mother, and that's all I knew. So after we had a little bit more conversation, I started thinking about it and I said, the word of God says in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, that love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. So at that point, I just had to forgive him of all things. And then take my 53-year-old self in that kitchen and cook him some breakfast and wash the dishes and take the trash out. Why? Because that's what love does. That's what forgiveness looks like. And that was my responsibility as a disciple within my household, or within his household as it was, to show that love so that he could see what the love of God looked like. You see, my prayer is that we will intercede on behalf of children, because these children in these households where all of this dysfunctionality is occurring have to go to school, and they have to sit in these classrooms and learn in the midst of all of this. When I was a teacher in the public school system, one of my students came to me and she said, "Miss Swain, can I see you out in the hall after math class?" And I said, "Sure." So after math was over, I took her out in the hallway and I said, "What's up? What's going on?" And she said, "My mother died yesterday." And I looked at her And I said, you can't just go around saying things like that. Is that really? And she said, oh yeah, really, it happened. She said she got hit by a car and the car threw her into the air and she hit a pole and she died. And my heart just fell. And I said, I want you to go downstairs and tell the principal everything that you just told me. And she said, okay. So when she went downstairs, I just stood there and I thought for a minute, that baby must be numb. She shouldn't even be at school. You see, her mom was a crack addict and she was also a single parent. So that baby probably came to school every day with a myriad of experiences that we had no knowledge of. So I went back into the classroom and all of the students were sitting there with their eyes as big as saucers. And one of the little boys said, Miss Swain, did she tell you what happened to her mother? And I said, yes, did that really happen? And the children said, yeah, that really happened. You see, the things and the conditions that our children go through in the homes don't just affect the children. They affect the entire community. And that's why I think it is so difficult. It would be rather difficult to propagate change in a system that you really know nothing about. You see, if you've never attended a public school, you've never taught in a public school, and you've filtered all of your children through the private school sector, it's going to be kind of difficult to know what's in the bags of the children when they come to school. You see, we have to be in a position where we can mitigate some of those circumstances and make it possible for the children to learn all that they can learn and become all that they can be. You see, I know what it's like to be in a school system and we have guests coming. You see, you clean up the house and you tell all of the children to be on their best behavior. But the best way to mitigate those circumstances, I think, is to be like the disciples and go down into the households and sit and have a meal with the parents and the children to see what kind of situations and circumstances that the children come from. What are the implications if we don't be as disciples in the educational system? Well, the implications are that we're going to continually have this Uri political system and this fractured educational system that we have. And we're not going to be able to produce the kinds of presidential candidates that we need, or candidates for mayor and House of Representatives that we need, and the candidates for Secretary of Education and Secretary of State, and principals and teachers and superintendents that we really need. We need to intercede for the children. Sometimes we need to just step out of all of our opulence and step out of all of our religion and start putting on the coat of Christ. Well, I'm going to stop now, but I'm going to leave that right there in prayer that we will come forth and start interceding for the children who have no voice. God bless you. I love you, and I'll see you next week.